Hello everyone, welcome to the 45th tutorial in the series of Complete Guide to ReactJS. So in this tutorial, we are going to see what is the difference between pure components as well as the regular components. So in the last tutorial, I have explained you like what is pure components and how to create the pure components and when to use pure components is something what we are going to see in this particular tutorial. So there are two ways like where you can create a component. One is by extending a component class which is inside the React.js, and one is by extending the pure components which we have done in the earlier tutorial. So in this we are going to see like where to use and why to use the pure components. So I'm going to use the same code base that I have used in the previous tutorial. For this, I'm going to do a specific demo to give a clear explanation like what is the difference between the pure components and the regular components. So over here, at first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a constructor. So we have a code snippet, and inside the constructor, I am going to create a state, and I'm going to mention a variable called type, and this type will take the value as component. I'm going to save it. And also over here in the shape, right? Shape component is there, right? So instead of this, I'm going to replace that with this dot shape dot type. I'm going to save this as well. So one more thing I'm just going to do is step 2 is I'm going to include component did mount method. And inside component did mount method, I'm going to set interval, and inside set interval, it should take two parameters as we discussed in the earlier series of tutorial. One is an empty parameters having a function call, and the second one is the number of seconds it has to refresh. It's an interval time. Right now, I'm mentioning it as 2 seconds. And over here, inside this set interval, I'm going to set state, and I'm going to set the same value. And what is the value is I'm going to mention it as type and components. And I'm also saving this. So you'd be wondering like why I am doing all this stuff. Please stay on board. I'll explain you what it is. As of now, just do the same. And I am setting the state with the same value, right? I am also going to call this over here, shape state dot type. What I am also planning to do is I am planning to pass a parameter where this dot shape dot type is passed. So when this is happening, set state is happening, at that time this particular component, this particular content whichever that is passed inside the circle, right, even that is getting refreshed. So as of now I'm just going to pass it as props like this, and over here as well I'm going to mention type equal to something like this dot, I mentioned it as shape whereas it should be state. So I am passing the state variable over here. Dot type. So I have passed it, but it still won't be rendered until and unless I am using it over here. So the concept is I am trying to re-render whenever I am setting a new value to that set state. So over here, props. You have passed it, and hence it should be props dot type. And also in circle.js, what I am going to do is I am also going to call it as this dot props dot type. I'm going to save it. Taking a look at the browser. So inside the browser, the shape component is being rendered. Circle component is also rendered. And a rectangle component is also rendered. So you can't able to see what is the difference in it. So what I am going to do is I am going to put a console.log statements in order to show you what is the difference. So this is the parent component, whichever that is being called from the app.js. So while rendering, I am going to put a console.log statement. And inside this statement, inside this console, I am going to say that this is being called from shape component. And I'm copying this so that I can copy and paste, saving it, going to rectangle, and after render method, I'm going to put this is being called from rectangle component, saving it. And also I'm going to the circle component, and inside the render method, I'm going to write I have been called from the circle component. So what I am trying to achieve is in shape, I am having a constructor, and inside the constructor, I am setting a state value as type, which is equal to component. In component did mount. So when this component did mount would be called? Component did mount would be called at the end of rendering. We have seen in the component lifecycle, right? Yeah. So component did mount, that is at the end of rendering, which is the last ranking of component lifecycle in mounting phase. What it does is it is setting an interval for every 2 seconds. It is going to set a state, and it is going to mention the same value whatever it is mentioned over here. So what is the difference in mentioning the same value? We will see right now. But as of now, take in mind we are setting the same component value whichever we have set. Okay. So whenever you are setting a state, what it happens is that particular value, whichever that is present over here, dynamically re-renders, right? So that is what I am trying to achieve over here. So for every 2 seconds, this state value would be refreshed, and the shape component value would be coming over here when component did mount is happening. Again, I am going to explain in a flow. At first, what happens is shape.js is getting loaded in your browser, and this component value type is present. So in shape over here, it would mention as component, and circle over here, it is passing as component, and rectangle is also passing as a component. And once the render is done, component did mount is the last ranking in mounting phase. So at this time, it would set a state, and the state is nothing but the one which is present in the constructor. It would set state with a new value, which is also same as the one which is the initial value. So both are same. It is setting a state again. So what happens is this would re-render, this would re-render, and also this would re-render, right? Since we have passed the value in the state which we are modifying it over here, it would re-render. So in rectangle, I am going to call it with the props, and in circle, I am going to call it as a props. So this content is also getting re-rendered, and I am going to mention some contents like this in order to verify, like whenever it is rendering, right, it would print in the console. So I am going to save it. Take a look at the browser. Perfect. Shape component is coming, circle component is coming, rectangle component is coming, and for every 2 seconds it would set an interval and it would again do it. So to identify what is the difference, we will right click, inspect, and take a look at the console. So when you take a look at the console, what happens is, we'll go to the first initial rendering. At first, shape component is getting called, right, console, and second time circle component is getting called, and third time rectangle component is also getting called. So till this point, nothing, any surprise is there. But when you are setting an interval for every 2 seconds, that is, for every 2 seconds you are setting a state, right? Whenever you are setting a state, wherever that particular value is referred, those component will also get re-rendered, right? So I am setting a state, so shape component is rendered, that particular render method is called. And if you take a look at the next line, the rectangle component is there, right, is being rendered, and you don't see the circle component is present. What is happening over here? Circle component is being extended by pure components, whereas the shape component and the rectangle component is being rendered with the normal, which is being extended by the normal regular component class, right? In shape, you see that it has been extended from a component. In rectangle is being extended from a component, and the circle is something, it is being extended from the pure components. So this is what is the difference between the components and pure components. What you mean by that is, so listen over here. So over here, whenever you are setting a state, at first what it would happen is, it would compare the current value with whatever the value you are going to change. If that value is going to be one and the same, whatever the contents present in the pure component, right, it won't re-render. So this is one of the advantages of pure components. This would increase the performance thereby. This is the main differences and the advantages of the pure components. So what is happening is, whenever your pure components is being called, that means rendered, whatever the properties is getting rendered, at that time it would check the current state value and the previous state value, or the current property value with the previous property values, and it would do a shallow comparison. What do you mean by shallow comparison? I'll explain bit moment after, but this is what it is doing. It would do a shallow comparison with the state that is going to update. If it is going to one and the same, it won't re-render itself. So by doing this, you can experience a lot of performance booster by using pure components. And this is what the actual usage of pure components is all about in ReactJS. So basically what is happening at the background is, the should component update method would be present, right? We have seen in the updating lifecycle phase. So this would return true only if there is a difference. When I say difference, the difference between the previous state value and the current state value. And we have also seen the should component update in the mounting phase would return true. If it is returning true, then only render. Otherwise it won't render. If it is returning false, it won't re-render, right? So the should component update will happen only when the props value is getting deferred or state value is getting deferred, and this comparison is being happening through shallow comparison. So what is shallow comparison? That we will take a look right now. So I am going to go into the browser, and over here I am using a JavaScript editor. If you want, you can use your own editor of your own. Over here I am going to explain what is the difference. So what I am going to do is I am going to enter a variable and I am going to mention it as my name. Like, say for example, I am going to give it as my name like this, Satish, like that. And in the next variable I am also going to mention Satish. Okay, so I am going to compare these both, and let me take a look what is happening in the console. Console.log A equal to B. This is doing some comparison, and you can see the result over here. So when you are comparing both the variables, and if both the variables contents is equal as well as its type is also equal, this is over here string and this is over here string. If it is equal, then it would return true. This is called shallow comparisons, and this is what it will happen in the primitive data types. So if it is the complex data types, what it is? So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another variable. Let C is equal to an array right now like this, and let D equal to like this 1, 2, 3. Right now what I am going to do is I am going to mention another variable that is equal to C, and I am going to write a console.log statement saying that whether C is equal to D, and in the next statement I am going to mention console.log C is equal to E or not. So this is JavaScript content. Okay, so whatever I am explaining right now is a JavaScript content, and it is doing a shallow comparisons. We will see what is shallow comparison is. So at first we will look for the primitive data types. Primitive data types in the sense like a string or an integer, those are comes under the category of primitive data types. For a primitive data types, it would check if the value a variable is having a return type, whatever that is present inside the content is same as this one, like that or not. For example, A is a string and it is having a name Satish. B is a variable, it is having a name Satish as well. So it would compare variable A with variable B and it would return true over here. Whereas if it is not a string, instead if it is say for example if it is like this, it would return false. You can also see over here. So same way, like if it is primitive type, it is very direct. Like if it is whatever the value is present inside this, if it is one and the same, it will return true. Let me get into the complex data types. So complex data types is nothing but an object, something like this. So for here I am mentioning C is a variable which is taking an array 1, 2, 3, and D is a variable again. It is taking 1, 2, 3, and E is a variable which is taking the reference of C. So at first I am checking whether the variable C is equal to D or not. It would return false because the reference that is present in this object and the reference that is present in this object is different. Though the values inside it is same, the reference is different. So it would return false. And over here I am mentioning a reference of E is equal to the reference of C, and hence it is returning true. So this is called shallow comparison or shallow difference. So in this over here I am setting a component as the type in state, and also over here I am also going to set the state and type is equal to component. So it is doing a shallow comparison. It is one and the same, and hence it is not rendering the pure components, which is nothing but circle. Over here is a pure component which is not getting re-rendered. So this is the advantage of pure components. And one more thing I just want to keep you posted is, like, it would avoid duplicates in your applications. Say for example, you are having a list around 50 contents is present in a list, and for 50 contents that is present inside the list, you are rendering a component. So if there is duplicates over there, then also it would render the component, right? If you are using a pure components over there, it would do a shallow comparison and find if the value is getting duplicated inside the list or not. If it is duplicated, it won't re-render the component in your web page. So this is one of the main advantage of pure components. So over here in code, what we have done is, like, it is comparing the props over here. So if you extend this particular shape, the parent component itself, to pure component, at that time the state comparison will also happen, right? So while you're doing a state comparison, it would check like whether the parent is being having a difference or not, like this particular state is having a difference or not, and the entire contents itself won't be re-rendered again when you are setting the interval. So I have modified the parent component into a pure component. Let me take a look at the browser. Over here I'm going to give localhost 3000. And it is rendering the shape component, circle component, everything. If I am going to take inspect the console, over here it would be rendered only once, because the parent shape component itself, at that time I am telling ReactJS it is a pure component. So whenever it is setting a state for every 2 seconds, at that time it would see the value of the current state and the previous state. Since it is doing a shallow comparison and it is going to be one and the same, the values won't be, the circle components, rectangle components won't be rendered. See, over here it is rendered only once. So this is the advantages of the pure components. So I took a lot amount of time in this tutorial because I want you guys to be clear in this particular concepts. It is very important topic in ReactJS, because when you are going to the advanced knowledge, and if you want to make your application best performed, at that time you would be using pure components. I want you guys to know, like, when this is actually being used and what is the advantages of it, and that's why I took your time. Thanks for watching. And one more thing I just want to keep you posted is, I'm going to place all the PPT that I have explained as well as the code inside this tutorial 45, whichever is present over here, so you can take a look at the code as well. Please feel free to subscribe, and in the next tutorial I'll come up with some other topic. Thanks, and have a nice day.